Now, let's dive into today's story. The original poster, OP, begins by saying, I want to start by saying this post is mostly to vent. If you've ever experienced someone you love completely shattering your trust, you might understand how I feel. Honestly, I don't even know what to think anymore. I'm sitting in an empty apartment right now, writing this, when 2 weeks ago I thought I'd be married by now. This is how it all started. 2 weeks ago, I woke up like it was any normal day. I reached over to her side of the bed, but it was empty. At first, I didn't think much of it. Maybe she went for a jog or had an early morning errand. But when I got up, brushed my teeth, and noticed her side of the bathroom completely untouched, I started to feel uneasy. She hadn't been there since last night. I tried calling her, but her phone went straight to voicemail. I sent a quick text. Hey, where are you? Woke up and you weren't home. No reply. As the hours passed, my anxiety grew. Mia always kept me informed if she was going somewhere. She'd at least send a quick text. By that afternoon, her phone was still off and I was spiraling. My mind raced with possibilities. Was she okay? Did something happen? I reached out to her family, thinking maybe she'd gone to them. Her mom sounded just as worried as I was, saying she had no idea where Mia was. Her dad said she hadn't mentioned anything about leaving. That's when my concern turned into full-blown panic. If even her parents didn't know where she was, this wasn't just a simple misunderstanding. I started calling her friends next, but no one answered. A few of them even left me on read, which only made me angrier. They were always so chatty at dinners or parties, but now they were suddenly silent. By the evening, I was pacing around the living room, wondering if I should call the police. What if something terrible had happened? That night, I barely slept. My phone was glued to my hand, and every time a notification popped up, my heart jumped, only for it to never be her. At 4 a.m., exhausted and running on pure anxiety, I opened Instagram out of habit, scrolling mindlessly. That's when I saw it, a group photo of her college friends at a bar, laughing and holding drinks. And there she was, front and center, smiling as if she didn't have a single care in the world. My stomach dropped. I stared at the picture, hoping I was mistaken. But it was undeniably her. The bar was tagged in the post, so out of curiosity I clicked on it. It wasn't even local. It was in Spain. Spain. My fiancée, the woman I was supposed to marry in 2 weeks, had flown halfway across the world without so much as a word to me. My brain refused to process it. This couldn't be real. But there she was, grinning with her friends like nothing was wrong. No call, no text, no explanation. I was livid. Who does something like that? How do you just disappear without telling your partner? I texted her immediately. I know where you are. You better get on the next flight home or this wedding is off. I didn't care if it sounded harsh. What else could I say? I followed up with a longer message, pouring out my disappointment and hurt. But did she reply? Of course not. Her phone was still off. I spent the rest of the night lying awake, replaying every moment of our relationship, trying to understand how we ended up here. The next day, her parents called me again, asking if I'd heard from her. When I explained what I'd found, they were just as shocked. Spain? Her mom repeated, her voice trembling. Her dad muttered something about damn friends under his breath. They promised to try and get in touch with her, but I wasn't holding my breath. At that point, I wasn't even sad anymore. I was just angry. The person I loved and trusted had chosen to party in another country instead of being here with me. This wasn't just about the wedding. It was about respect. That evening, she finally called. Her voice was calm, as if nothing had happened. Hey, she said casually, like we weren't on the brink of a massive fallout. I didn't let her finish. Do you have any idea what you've done? I demanded, my voice trembling. You disappeared. I thought something had happened to you. Do you know how terrified I was? She sighed, sounding annoyed. "It's not that big of a deal," she said. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She went on to explain that her college friends had planned this surprise trip for months and told her about it last week. They'd already paid for everything, and she didn't want to waste their money. When I asked why she hadn't told me, her answer was even worse. "Because I knew you'd overreact. I deserved this trip. I haven't gone anywhere with my friends in years." Overreact? I was too stunned to yell. "What about our wedding?" I asked. She shrugged. "I'll be back before then. It's just 2 weeks. Relax." That word, relax, set me off. "If you're not back tomorrow," I told her, "there won't be a wedding to come back to." Her response, "I already told you I'm staying. Deal with it." Then she hung up. I spent the rest of the night stewing in anger. Every time I thought about her sitting in some bar in Spain while I was here, trying to hold things together, my blood boiled. By morning, I'd made my decision. I wasn't waiting for her to come back. I was canceling the wedding. She could party all she wanted, but she wasn't partying her way back into my life. I think deep down I already knew the truth, but I couldn't stop myself. I kept scrolling through Instagram, even though it felt like self-inflicted punishment. More photos, more stories. This time she was at a beach, drink in hand, arm around a friend, smiling as if nothing in the world could bother her. She looked so carefree, and I wasn't even jealous anymore. I was just angry. It wasn't just that she was out having fun while I was falling apart. It was that she didn't seem to care. Not about me, not about us. That was the moment I decided I couldn't just sit around waiting for her to come to her senses. The first thing I did was text the wedding planner. "We need to talk," I wrote. Typing those words felt surreal, like I wasn't even talking about my own wedding. She replied almost immediately, probably thinking it was about some last-minute detail like the seating chart. Little did she know. Next, I started drafting a message for the wedding guests. I stared at the screen for what felt like an eternity, rewriting it in my head over and over before finally typing it out. "Hi everyone, I wanted to let you know the wedding is cancelled. Please don't contact me about this right now. I need time to process everything. Thank you for understanding." I didn't include any explanations because I didn't feel like I owed anyone more than that. After I hit send, the replies started flooding in. Most were sympathetic. "I'm so sorry to hear this," or "Let me know if you need anything." But a few people were more curious, asking, "What happened?" or "Are you okay?" I ignored those. I wasn't ready to talk about it. By that afternoon, the news had spread. Her parents called me, their voices shaking with confusion. "What's going on?" her mom asked. "Why are people saying the wedding is off?" I explained everything, from the moment she disappeared to the terrible phone call we'd had. I told them about the texts, the Instagram posts, and how she had blatantly disregarded everything we'd built together. Her mom broke down crying, and her dad muttered something about how she needed to grow up. They promised they'd try to get through to her, but I wasn't holding my breath. If she hadn't listened to me, why would she listen to them? That evening she called again. This time I let it ring. I couldn't bear to hear more excuses. Then she texted, "Please answer. I just want to talk." I didn't reply. The next day I started making the hard calls. First I canceled the venue, then the photographer, and finally the florist. I thought it would hurt more, but oddly it felt liberating, like I was reclaiming control of my life. Each cancellation was a step toward freeing myself from the mess she'd created. The wedding planner was kind, offering her condolences. "I'm sorry to hear this. Let me know if there's anything I can do." But not all the vendors were as understanding. Some charged hefty cancellation fees, which stung, but I figured I'd deal with that later. Once the logistics were handled, there was only one thing left to do: pack up her belongings. I couldn't bring myself to look at them too closely, so I shoved everything into boxes as quickly as I could. Her clothes, her books, even the silly little trinkets she insisted on keeping on the coffee table, it all went into the spare room. Out of sight, out of mind. That night, her parents called again. They'd finally managed to get through to her. "She's upset and wants to come home," her mom said, her voice pleading. "Please, just give her a chance to explain. She loves you." But love wasn't enough. "If she loved me," I said coldly, "she wouldn't have done this in the first place. She can come back, but she won't be coming back to me." 2 days later, I saw her car pull into the driveway, her suitcase still in the trunk. I didn't even open the door. She knocked and called my name, pleading, "Please, let's talk. We can fix this." Her voice cracked, and for a brief moment, I almost caved. Almost. Then I remembered the phone call, her laughter in the Instagram stories, and the way she told me to deal with it. "I already told you," I said through the door. "The wedding is off. You made your choice." She started crying, loud, messy sobs that echoed through the door. It hurt to hear her like that, but I couldn't let her back in. Not after everything. Eventually, she left. I watched her drive away, tears streaming down her face. It felt like a weight had been lifted, but it also felt like I'd lost a part of myself. That night, my phone blew up again with messages from her friends, her family, and even some of our mutual friends. "She's really sorry," they said. "You need to talk to her." But I couldn't. Not yet. Maybe not ever. After Mia left, the reality of what I'd done began to sink in. The wedding wasn't just postponed, it was cancelled, and so was our relationship. At first, I felt an odd sense of relief, like I'd finally made a decision and didn't have to agonize over it anymore. But that relief didn't last long. Everywhere I turned, there were reminders of her, the magnets she'd collected from all our trips, her favorite mug still sitting in the sink, the framed photo of us from her cousin's wedding last year, where everyone said we looked like the perfect couple. It was like the apartment itself was mocking me. I thought about boxing up the rest of her things and dropping them off at her parents' house, but even the idea of seeing her mom's face made my stomach churn. So I left everything in the spare room and closed the door. Out of sight, out of mind, right? The messages kept coming. Friends, family, random acquaintances, all wanting to know what happened. Some were supportive, saying, "I'm so sorry you're going through this," or "Let me know if you need anything." But others weren't so kind. A few mutual friends started questioning my decision. "Are you seriously canceling the wedding over this?" one wrote. "She didn't cheat on you, she just went on a trip with her friends. Don't you think you're overreacting?" That word, overreacting, kept coming up, and every time it did, it infuriated me. This wasn't about the trip. It wasn't just about the trip. It was the way she went about it. She didn't simply book a last-minute flight, she vanished. No calls, no replies to texts, nothing. And when I finally figured out where she was, she had the audacity to act like I was the unreasonable one. She knew exactly what she was doing. I eventually responded to one of the more persistent friends. She made her choice. Now she has to live with it. Her parents, however, didn't let up. They called me every single day for a week, begging me to give her a chance. "She's devastated," her mom kept saying. "She knows she made a mistake." Her dad even tried to guilt-trip me. "You've been together for 6 years. Are you really going to throw it all away over one bad decision?" That phrase stuck with me. One bad decision. Was that really all it was? Or was this just the tip of something much deeper? I couldn't stop replaying her words from that phone call. "I need to experience life before settling down." It was as if she was already second-guessing the future we'd been building together, and I couldn't unhear that. Eventually, my own parents got involved. Whether Mia's family contacted them or word just spread, I wasn't sure. One evening, I got a text from my mom. "We need to talk." When I called her back, she didn't waste time. "What's going on?" she asked. "Why is the wedding cancelled?" I tried explaining, but she didn't seem to get it. She kept cutting me off, asking why I couldn't just forgive Mia and move on. "People make mistakes," she said. "You're not perfect either, you know." That stung. Of course, I wasn't perfect, no one is. But this wasn't about some petty argument over what to eat for dinner or who forgot to take out the trash. "Mom, it's not just about the trip," I said. "It's how she handled it. She didn't respect me or what we had." She sighed. "I just think you're making a big mistake." That was the end of the conversation. The breaking point came a few days later when I received an email from Mia's friends. Not a text or DM, but an actual email. I guess they assumed I'd blocked them on everything else, so this was their last resort. The message started with a weak apology. "We're sorry about how things turned out," they wrote. "We didn't mean for it to go this far." But as I kept reading, it became clear they weren't apologizing. Instead, they were trying to shift the blame onto me. "She was really looking forward to this trip," they said. "She's been so stressed about the wedding, and we thought it would help her relax. We didn't think you'd react like this." React like this? They made it sound like my frustration was the problem, not Mia's behavior. The worst part? They admitted to encouraging her to ignore me. "We told her not to worry about your texts," they wrote. "We thought you'd cool off once she got back." Cool off? They thought I'd just cool off while they were halfway across the world partying with my fiancé? I couldn't even finish reading the email. I deleted it and blocked their address. By the end of the week, I'd reached my limit. I texted Mia's parents and told them she could come by to collect her belongings. "I'm not dropping anything off, and I'm not sticking around for some emotional confrontation," I wrote. "Just tell her to come when I'm not home." Her mom immediately called me. "Please, just talk to her," she begged. "She's been crying nonstop. She's not eating. She's not sleeping. She needs to see you." "She needed to see me before she got on that plane," I replied, my voice cold. That shut her up. The next day, Mia texted me for the first time since she'd returned. "Can we talk?" she wrote. "I just want to explain." But I didn't need an explanation. I already knew everything I needed to know. "I'm sorry," I replied. "It's too late." She didn't respond. When she finally came to pick up her things, I thought I'd feel relief, like I could finally put this nightmare behind me. But as I watched her dad carry box after box to their car, I felt an ache in my chest. This wasn't how things were supposed to end. We were supposed to build a life together, plan our future, grow old side by side. Now all of that was gone. When they finished, her dad approached me and offered a handshake. "I'm sorry it had to end like this," he said. "Me too," I replied. Mia didn't say a word. She got into the car and drove away. That night, I sat in the now empty apartment and stared at the boxes she'd left behind. Photos, letters, little souvenirs from our trips. I didn't have the heart to throw them out. Not yet. Instead, I shoved them into the closet and closed the door. The days that followed were quiet, but not in the way I'd hoped. The silence was suffocating, like the walls were closing in on me. For the first time in years, I had no one to text, no one to call. Even scrolling through social media felt like a trap, with every reminder of her still lurking. Her friends, who I'd already blocked, found other ways to reach out. A few mutual friends who hadn't yet chosen sides tried to play mediator. "Mia really regrets everything," they told me. "You should talk to her. Just one conversation." But I wasn't ready. Maybe I never would be. I told them exactly what I'd been telling everyone else. "It's over. Please stop bringing this up." But the pressure didn't let up. Even friends I thought would support me began turning against me. "You're being selfish," one of them texted. "You've been with her for 6 years, and you're throwing it all away because of your ego." There it was again, that word, ego. like I was some controlling tyrant who couldn't handle her having fun without me. It wasn't about that. It was about trust and respect. I ended up blocking that friend too. My parents, on the other hand, were relentless. Every conversation turned back to Mia. "You should give her a chance," my mom said for what felt like the 100th time. "She made a mistake, but she's young. You both are." "Not too young to know how to communicate," I snapped. My dad chimed in. "Sometimes you have to look at the bigger picture. Are you really going to let 6 years go because of one fight?" "It wasn't a fight," I shot back. "It was a choice, and she chose to leave." They just didn't get it, and I was starting to realize they probably never would. The breaking point with my parents came a week later when I stopped by their house to pick up some old belongings. My mom cornered me in the kitchen and started in with her usual spiel. "She's been calling us," she said. "She's devastated. Don't you think you should at least hear her out?" "No, Mom," I replied, trying to keep my tone measured. She pressed on. "She's a good girl, you know that. She just got caught up in the moment. It doesn't mean she doesn't love you." That was it. I lost my composure. If she loved me, she wouldn't have done this. End of story. The look on my mom's face was like I'd physically struck her. She didn't say anything else, and I left knowing our relationship wouldn't be the same. Meanwhile, Mia's college friends reached out again, this time from a different number. "We just wanted to say sorry again for what happened," their message read. "We didn't mean for things to get this bad." I didn't even bother replying. They'd already shown where they stood when they encouraged Mia to stay in Spain and ignore me. Their apologies were meaningless now. Still, the messages kept coming. "She's miserable without you," one of them wrote. "She's willing to do anything to fix this. Please talk to her." I blocked the number. I wanted to move on. I wanted to wake up one day without feeling like my entire life had crumbled. But every time I tried, someone would drag me back into the chaos. Mutual friends, her family, even acquaintances who barely knew us were chiming in like they had any right to an opinion. The only thing that gave me a reprieve was work. I buried myself in my job, taking on extra shifts and staying late whenever possible. It was exhausting, but at least it kept my mind occupied. I also started going to the gym, not because I was trying to win the breakup, but because I needed something, anything, to pull me out of the apartment. At first, it was just a way to pass the time, but eventually, it became a routine. 2 weeks after Mia came to collect her things, I got a text from her parents. "She'd like to talk to you," her dad wrote. "Just one conversation for closure." Closure. That word made me laugh bitterly. She didn't care about closure when she boarded that plane. She didn't care about it when she ignored my calls and told me to deal with it. Now, suddenly, she wanted closure. I didn't reply. A month later, I ran into her at a coffee shop. I hadn't seen her since the day she picked up her stuff, and it caught me completely off guard. She was sitting by the window, staring at her phone. She looked different, tired, older somehow. I froze, torn between leaving before she noticed me and facing her head-on. Before I could decide, she looked up, and our eyes met. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. She gave me a faint smile and waved. I hesitated before walking over to her table. "Hi," she said softly. "Hi," I replied. We stood there awkwardly for a few seconds before she gestured to the chair across from her. "Do you want to sit?" I did. We didn't talk about the wedding, the trip, or the choices that tore us apart. Instead, we made polite small talk. She told me about her new job, and I mentioned mine. It felt distant, like we were two acquaintances catching up rather than people who had once planned a life together. When I left, I felt strange. Not sad exactly, just hollow. That encounter made me realize something. I was never going to get the closure I wanted. Not from her, not from anyone. The only way to truly move on was to accept that some things don't make sense, and not every wound heals cleanly. After running into Mia, I found myself thinking about her a lot, not in a maybe we'll get back together way, but more like trying to piece together what had gone wrong. Could I have done something differently? Was I too harsh, too rigid? Those questions haunted me late at night when the apartment was too quiet. I'd replay memories in my head, the way she laughed when we first met, the late-night conversations about our dreams, the certainty we once had about our future. 6 years of shared moments, and now we were strangers. 3 months after the breakup, a friend convinced me to try therapy. At first, I resisted. "I'm fine," I told her. "I just need time." But time wasn't helping. Every time I thought I was moving forward, something would pull me back. A memory, a message from someone who didn't know the wedding was canceled, or even a song on the radio. It was exhausting. That first therapy session felt awkward, but it was the start of something I didn't know I needed. I wasn't sure how to begin, so the words just tumbled out. I was supposed to get married, but I called it off. The therapist nodded gently and asked me to elaborate. As I started talking, all the frustration, confusion, and guilt I had been suppressing came rushing out. By the end of that first session, I felt like I had run a marathon. Therapy didn't fix everything right away, but it helped me start unraveling emotions I hadn't even realized I was holding on to. I began to understand that my anger wasn't solely about the trip. It stemmed from deeper issues. The way Mia handled everything revealed how differently we viewed our relationship. For me, marriage was about being partners. For her, it seemed more like something she was doing out of obligation. The therapist asked me a question that stuck with me. "If this hadn't happened, do you think you would have noticed these differences later?" I couldn't stop thinking about that. Maybe the wedding would have gone on as planned, and we would have spent years together before realizing we were completely out of sync. As painful as it was, perhaps it was better that it ended before we said, "I do." I shifted my focus to myself. Going to the gym became more than just a way to pass the time. I started setting goals. I took up running in the mornings, something I'd never tried before. I even joined a cooking class because I was tired of living off takeout. Work became my sanctuary. I dove into projects, volunteered for extra assignments, and eventually earned a small promotion. My colleagues teased me about becoming a workaholic, but I didn't mind. It was far better than sitting at home dwelling on what could have been. About 6 months after the breakup, Mia texted me. It was brief. "I hope you're doing well." I stared at the message for what felt like forever, unsure of how to respond. Part of me wanted to ignore it, but another part felt like replying, not to rekindle anything, but to acknowledge the years we'd shared. In the end, I typed, "I am. I hope you are, too." She didn't respond, and that was fine. My relationship with my parents remained strained. They were so attached to the idea of Mia and me as the ideal couple that they couldn't see how toxic things had become toward the end. Whenever I tried to explain, they dismissed it as me being stubborn or dramatic. It hurt, but I realized I couldn't keep chasing their approval. Instead, I started spending holidays with friends, and honestly, it was an improvement. A year after the wedding that wasn't, I realized I felt lighter. I wouldn't say I was happy, exactly, but I was no longer carrying the weight of what had happened. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't replaying old conversations or questioning whether I'd made the right choice. I saw Mia once more at a mutual friend's wedding. She was with someone new, and so was I. We exchanged polite smiles across the room, but didn't approach each other. Later that night, as I danced with my date, I noticed something. I wasn't sad or jealous or anything at all. It was over. Looking back, canceling the wedding was the best decision I've ever made. It was painful, messy, and absolutely heartbreaking, but it forced me to face truths I might have otherwise ignored. Over the past year, I've learned so much about myself. I've learned how to set boundaries and prioritize what I need in a relationship. I've learned that it's okay to walk away from something you've invested years into if it no longer serves you. Most importantly, I've learned that sometimes letting go is the only way to move forward. If you've read this far, thank you. I don't know what the future holds, but for the first time in a long while, I'm excited to find out. Stay strong, and don't settle for less than you deserve.